And welcome to today's episode of Neurodiversity with Theo Smith. We have a very special edition today. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest challenges in the workplace, rethinking recruitment to make it truly neuro-inclusive, a big passion of mine. I'm thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, Steve Collinson, Chief HR Officer at Zurich Insurance UK. Steve will be sharing insights from Zurich's latest research, which highlights the barriers neurodivergent candidates face in recruitment and the incredible steps Zurich is taking to address these challenges. Together, through this edition, we'll explore the practical initiatives Zurich is implementing and actionable strategies to build more inclusive hiring processes. You can't wait, I can see it! If you're a recruiter, hiring manager, or simply passionate about creating better workplaces, or maybe just a candidate who would like to know more about what happens behind the scenes, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. So let's dive into this important topic on how we can play our part in unlocking the potential of neurodivergent talent. Welcome, Steve! Oh, Steve,
there we go.
There we go. Brilliant. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Theo. Really great to be with you, to be with everybody who's watching today. Really, really pleased to be able to share some of the research and the findings and the work that we've been doing at Zurich to, as you say, make the world of work a better place for people who are not neurotypical.
Fantastic. And we've already got plenty of people writing in comments saying hello. Welcome. Really pleased you're joining us today. We have a wide variety of audience, from heads of TA, D&I, and HR leaders coming to watch what Steve has to say. So get ready. You're in for the ride. So, Steve, why is this such an important topic? Why should people care about it? Why has this come onto your radar recently, the topic of neurodiversity and neuroinclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with a really simple statement to say that many of the things that we've been doing at Zurich over the last few years to live out our ambition, which is to be the best place to work for the widest range of people, many of those things that we've been doing because they're simply the right thing to do. I'm sure during our conversation today, Theo, we'll touch on the topic. Maybe we'll get questions, the idea of how you build business cases and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure some of that will come out. But broadly speaking, we have this ambition that we want Zurich to be the best place to work for the very widest range of people. We're really determined to create an environment where people can thrive, not just survive the workplace. And for the last sort of 5 years or so, we've adopted an approach which has really aimed to stop creating PowerPoint slides about diversity, inclusivity, and belonging, and to start taking concrete steps. We've got enough slides, right? We all know what we should be doing here. It's about taking concrete steps. For us, the reality, if we really do mean what we say about being the best place to work for the widest range of people, I'll try and stop saying it. If we really do mean what we say, when we kind of use those words, we're very clear that along with many other characteristics, facets and features of human nature, we're very clear that neurodiversity is an important element for us to focus on, making sure that people can thrive. We know for certain, because our people tell us, that when they're in the right roles, I'm specifically thinking about people who are neurodivergent, when they're in the right roles, they've got the right support around them, and there's genuine, open, two-way communication, magic can happen. And we're doing this, our focus is on this with 1 in 7 people in the UK, about 6 million adults being neurodivergent. Why would we want to put barriers in place of this important talent pool joining and being successful, or turn it on its head? Why wouldn't an organization want to adopt practices that make you an attractive and safe place to work for a really enormous talent pool?
Brilliant. And why now then? What is the thing that's been the big driver that has made this moment the opportunity to do it? And I guess, how do you balance that? Because I know a lot of leaders say to me often, we have all these different things that we need to manage, that we're responsible for. You know, all these different elements of DE&I. How do we now prioritize? How do we juggle all of these different priorities and decide to run with neurodiversity and neuroinclusion as a concept today?
Yeah, so I would say that we have been very clear. The work that we've done over the last several years across all facets of diversity, we've been really clear that there's no single silver magic bullet, is there, to making your organization more diverse across any characteristic. There's no easy way of doing this. It's, you know, often we are trying to change organizational practices that have been in existence for a very, very long time. If I think about things like the work we've done over the last few years on things like gender diversity and equality, equalizing parental leave, most maternity and paternity policies in most organizations were written in the 80s. And we find ourselves in the 2020s without, you know, kind of continuing to use those old approaches. We've equalized those approaches at Zurich, by the way. When you think about it, the approach that we've taken has been to say, what organizational challenges are we actually facing? So for the first part, I've been very lucky to be in this role at a fantastic global company for almost 6 years. We started with looking at gender diversity. Our drive to really push the diversity agenda at Zurich was based around the reporting of the gender pay gap. It gave us a real kick that we didn't want to report, you know, the kind of gap that we were reporting. Luckily, we've made lots of progress. So like many things across many organizations, like anything else that you want to do, we prioritized. We found ourselves in the last few years with a greater voice internally, and then more impetus and stimulus coming externally. But I would say that the bigger part of the voice to focus on neurodiversity came internally from colleagues who were in our organization, who happened to be neurodiverse, who were saying, if you're really sure and true about this thing about diversity, there's another element here that you may not be thinking about or focusing on. And that led us over the last few years to really listen to that employee voice. Lots of the things that we've done for the last several years have been based around employee voice and you know, the prompts that that's given us. Our employee voice steered us in the direction of neurodiversity a couple of years ago, and then more recently we took lots of steps. I'm sure we'll get to them, Theo, about the things that we've been doing. But more recently, along with the really talented people I have alongside me, by the way, I have an amazing, incredible HR team at Zurich. We call ourselves the people team, an incredible team. I get to do wonderful things like this, and they do incredible hard work in the background. Along with our communications and press team, we thought that it was time that we went and got some really good quality research. In the run-up to this session, you and I were talking, weren't we, Theo, and talking about that, you know, for diversity, there's often a lack of data. And as an HR director, lots of things pass across my desk, you know, great things that you could do in your organization, but relatively few of those things come with really good quality data. So we launched an approach to build our own research around what it was like if you're neurodiverse and you're looking for employment, what people find.
Brilliant. And that's a nice segue right on to what we want to talk about next. And that is the challenges and the barriers, the data, the insights that can help inform us. You know, you surveyed 1,000 people who identify as neurodivergent, I believe, to be able to gather enough data, external validation to guide some of the work that you were doing, specifically because this is has a hyper focus around the recruitment piece, right? And if you're going to do that, you need to know people's experiences externally, why they may not want to come and apply. And what I find interesting is we know that there's issues with data already from a science perspective, from a medical perspective, research, academic, and there's just not enough out there. So any additional data that we can get can be really helpful, especially when you share that data publicly so that others can benefit. So let's just look at some of that, Steve, because I think it's interesting and I want to take your view on it. So just some of those key data points, and you can share some others with us. But 63% of respondents, neurodivergent adults, feel employers see neurodiversity as a red flag. 63%. Nearly a quarter of neurodivergent candidates struggle with vague job descriptions and inflexible interview formats. And let me just say something, Steve, that based on what you were saying before around some of the key areas you've been looking at in terms of DE&I, communication is really important, not just from a neurodivergent perspective, but culturally, from a gender perspective, not speaking English in the UK as a first language, for example. We know all of those create barriers in terms of the way that we communicate, especially when it's vague. So that's interesting. And 31% saying their applications weren't progressed after disclosure. Just give us your view on how you felt when you saw some of this data and whether it surprised you and the team. How did it make you feel?
Yeah, it was genuinely a real surprise, Theo. We thought that we would see some difficult messages emerging, some difficult themes. We went out to do this research. We could have done it on a whole variety of topics, but we went out to do this research to understand whether some of the things that candidates who had approached us in the past, or colleagues who were built already within Zurich and building successful careers, and they told me, I do lots of direct listening to colleagues, they told me about difficult stories. We wanted to understand whether what they were telling us was widespread. And I think some of the numbers you've just shared, and I'll throw a few more in a second, they're really shocking findings. Half of neurodivergent adults feel they've been discriminated against when looking for a job. 1 in 5 told us they'd actually been laughed at. 1 in 6 had job offers rescinded. And 47% of people told us that they just didn't feel like they could disclose their neurodiversity to recruiters or hiring managers. And that's a real challenge, isn't it? Because that means that, if you then do go on to secure a role, you're starting in a place where you feel like you've got this thing that you should be talking about, or maybe you want to be talking about, but you haven't been able to talk about it. And of course, the person then that walks through the door of an organization on the first day is feeling the need to hide an important factor of their life. There was some really interesting. You pulled out this idea that 2/3 say employers see neurodiversity as a red flag. I find that really worrying and really horrifying, and I'm sure that certainly leads people to think, should I even be applying for a role? But then there were some really interesting outcomes as well that I thought are worth sharing. Or impacts, actually, let's call it impacts. 94% of people in the survey that we did said that their ability to negotiate a good salary and benefits package was impacted by their neurodiversity. 89% told us that their savings have been impacted in the past. And 92% said overall neurodiversity has impacted their earning capacity. So as well as having this data that tells us what it's like to be in one of our processes, or I would say struggling through a standard recruitment process that's built, as most are, for neurotypical applicants, there are some really difficult impacts. There are some really interesting studies as well, though, or some interesting pieces of data. More than 1/3 of neurodivergent job seekers told us they've panicked in an interview because the question structure was just overly complicated. And then 1/4 have struggled with long and elaborate application processes. 1/4 have struggled, I think you pulled this one out as well, Theo, of vague job descriptions that are hard to relate to. And then a slightly smaller number of people, 23% of people, told us that things like timed tasks and presentations are very difficult for neurodivergent colleagues. All of this data, I think, builds a picture that tells us that as employers, if we do want to tap into this important workforce, because let's be really clear, neurodivergent colleagues bring skills that many employers absolutely need in the workplace. But if we're making and putting barriers up in front of people, that makes it really difficult. I'll share one more a couple more stats, and then we'll go on with the conversation. It's not all bad news. 63% of people say things are getting better than they used to be for neurodivergent people at work, and over half say it's easier to disclose neurodiversity than it should be. Now, those 2 last numbers don't negate the really difficult findings that we've seen through this research, but I think it's always nice to bring a balance.
Yeah, and I do like to focus on the positives as well as some of the challenges. But when we've just, there's somebody mentioned in the comment section, here we go, 100% not surprised over here as an autistic ADHD job seeker, right?
Yeah.
And that's the reality. For those who were impacted, not all know, but many are now starting to recognize, oh, these invisible barriers, I now see them. And therefore, I can now get frustrated about them, whereas before I just didn't understand they were barriers at all, or that they existed. And I think this is part of the journey, right? That people are starting to understand, they're starting to recognize and realize. And so are some employers. And therefore, when you come into contact and you felt this frustration and you've seen these barriers and you can see somebody dealing with them, then it does feel like a relief. But proportionately, that is not happening across enough organizations. And again, that's why it's important that we have the data, the insights, and we have the actions that now others can follow. And people today can take back to their workplace and say, do you know what Steve and the team is doing at Zurich? So when we think about some of the other data points there, anything else that came out that really directly impacted, or any of those that you mentioned, that really directly impacted how you then went about implementing changes into your recruitment assessment onboarding process? How did this data influence the way that you now think and some of the work that you're going to implement that we can talk about?
Yeah, so this data has given us the really important core data. If you were ever in a place where it was difficult to influence stakeholders, and I genuinely recognize, Theo, I'm extremely blessed. I work with an executive team of decision makers who just get it. When I talk about the need for us to do things because they're simply the right thing to do, rarely am I asked these days for a spreadsheet or a cost benefit analysis, because I'll be really honest, I think when you're starting and trying to create a cost benefit analysis around any topic around diversity, I sort of think you've lost the battle, and your stakeholders don't quite get the point. I'm extremely lucky. So this data has helped us to consolidate. There were a few other things that were really important along the way. So the Buckland Review of Autism in Employment Reports recommendations were carry some really interesting research and I think very well-founded basis on neuroinclusive hiring practices. They were a really important input to our thinking, which has encouraged us to change our hiring practices. I know we'll get to that, and also some of the things that we've done about, once you're already part of an organisation. So that work and that report of the Buckland Review were really important to us. It shared things like that only 3 in 10 working age autistic people are in work. It found that employers don't often explain what a job is properly, or think about how people will fit in teams when they're trying to to recruit. They also highlighted the need for things like disclosure and reasonable adjustments, employee training and awareness, a need to modernise recruitment practices for better job descriptions, and also importantly, and I'm sure we'll get to this as well, to consider whether AI and automated filtering in recruitment processes might be discriminating against autistic candidates, something I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Wow, yeah. So see that report that we can share in the link, the Buckland report, I think is very interesting and has some great insights. However, for many of the people listening on here, I think there is a generic nature to some of it. And what I mean by that is when you have to translate some of those ideas and concepts into like tangible, actionable changes within your environment, that's where the barrier. So just for very quickly, somebody's mentioned here that resolution of disclosure dilemma for ND employees, job seekers requires psychological safety and trust. This takes time and is often violated with prejudice and awareness. employers and recruiters are missing out on invaluable skills from sincere and brilliant job seekers. This is such an important topic. Thank you. Well, that's why we're discussing it, right? But there's an example of something you just mentioned from that report about disclosure. And we know it's one of the biggest issues that we have, because so many organizations are like, just tell us and we can help you. But we have those who don't have the diagnosis, which we'll come on to in a bit. Those who don't have the diagnosis and don't have the privilege of being able to get it, but they may think they are. We have those who don't know at all and may never know. We have those who think they are and they want to share with the world, want to be proud. We have those who have a diagnosis and want to share with it. You start to see the complexity of the people in different experiences and different parts of that journey. And therefore, yes, we need people to let us know I need help. But if they don't know what that help looks like, that's really problematic. And if they have to wait 4 or 5 years for a diagnosis, like I did with my daughter, and then the diagnosis doesn't actually come with any tangible stuff around how to help, this is where, there's additional barriers that go beyond what is a very helpful report, but you then go through this level of complexity around, right, where am I going to focus on? What am I going to do? What changes and adaptations am I going to make? And I guess this leads us on to the journey that you went on beyond that report and the insights that you gained from the data.
Yeah, agreed. And let me share with you some of the things that we've done around the recruitment. Should we start with the hiring process, the recruitment process? And of course, notwithstanding, I think one of the really interesting topics is, how do you encourage an individual who knows probably very little beyond your website about your organization? How do you encourage them to trust you with this important piece of information, as you say, if they know it about themselves there? How do you encourage them to trust you? Internally, when I talk to Zurich people about their declaration information across a whole variety of topics, I can give them the reassurance that, even I, as Chief HR Officer at Zurich, can't see your declaration data. I talk about that a lot. There's one person in my team who can see that data, and other than that, we use it on an aggregate basis. But how do you encourage people outside of your organisation that we've been doing, within Zurich and doing events like this? We have trained our talent acquisition team and our hiring managers to offer unprompted adjustments in the hiring process to people, to anybody. Doesn't matter whether they tell us they're neurodiverse, because we think that's a good and a right thing to do. We also have some visible internal and external role models. And by the way, I think there's a teeny tiny rainbow scarf on the giraffe in the background of my picture. I just wanted to say I'm a proudly out, and I'm an out proud gay insurance leader. I take my responsibility to be visible about about my life really seriously, and visibility, if you can see it, you can be it, is really important. So we encourage people to talk. But let me talk about the 5 adjustments that job seekers have told us are the most helpful to them. First is explaining instructions and expectations clearly in advance, the format of a interview or hiring process, the location, the duration, and the process. 38% of people told us, and that was the top thing that people requested, just tell us clearly what this is going to do, what we're going to do, where it's going to be, and let me work out what that's going to feel like. So 38% of people told us the most important thing is just explaining instructions. We shouldn't need telling that, right? That should not need to be told to us through research, but that's what people share. The second, and I think this one is really, really interesting for hiring, anyone hiring in an organization, is removing group interviews and group assessments. We know, because our neurodiverse applicants and colleagues tell us, that these 2 processes, group interviews, group assessments, are particularly difficult for neurodiverse candidates. And they make a plea to say, if you can remove, wherever you can remove those, you are removing a barrier to a neurodiverse candidate coming through your hiring process. The third, only asking for essential job requirements and qualifications. I have a real passion about this one. This is about things like not specifying a degree unless it's absolutely essential to a role. Not specifying, Zurich is we're an insurer. We're very proud to be a UK, a big UK insurer, part of a very big Swiss group. We're really proud to do what we do from an insurance perspective. We're also proud that many of our colleagues go through training through the Chartered Insurance Institute and pick up professional qualifications. But we don't include degrees and the need to be CII qualified, Chartered Insurance Institute, in job specifications where it's just not relevant. And that was the third thing that people told us, to remove, to only leave in a job advert the things that are essential. Fourth was avoid using ambiguous, literal or subjective language in job descriptions. And let me give you an example. This one really made me stop and think. Because part of my background before I was in HR, I was in communications. Including in a job advert that you need to be a good communicator, it's everywhere, right? You could probably find it in almost every job advert you look at. But what does that actually mean? Could any of us, if we asked 10 people what being a good communicator meant, we'd get 10 answers, right? How on earth is a neurodivergent candidate expected to be able to determine whether they fit that requirement? And is it even needed? So instead of saying things like good communicator, surely we should be saying things like, at times you'll need to present to groups. At times you might need to attend a board meeting. Do you know what I mean? Things like that. And then the final things that people talked about, and this is just so simple, sharing adaptations that you've given before. If you're prepared to share in advance, which we are, by the way, if you're prepared to share in advance the interview questions for a role, tell somebody. If you've made it clear that adjustments are available and somebody's trusted you with information to say, I'm neurodivergent, this is me, what can you do for me? If you're prepared to share the questions in advance, tell the individual you're prepared to share the questions in advance. Don't force them to ask. So those were 5 of the things that through both the research and then our experience, people have told us make the biggest difference.
Brilliant. And I guess that's the insight and data that can start to make those informed changes. And then you can start to build out the choice, the options, as you mentioned it, because you now have some evidence around what's been requested, what's worked, and therefore offer that. And so Luke Morrison has just mentioned, imagine, a place where you didn't have to request it, you didn't have to mention it. It was just these options were available to help improve better lives. I mean, we know that some of the innovations in life that we benefit from, like text messaging, was born out of individuals creating something to help themselves because they weren't able to communicate because of hearing. And it's many other aspects, right? We create something in the very sharp end of need, but it ultimately goes on to benefit so many more people. And then we get into candidate and employee experience, right? We're getting into that beautiful space and place where people can feel like they're having a really good experience, which we've been talking about for decades, but I just don't think we kind of get there. Neuro inclusion and neurodiversity, I think, is giving us a mechanism to really start to get to that point of giving people proper experiences that connect with them on a neurological level. So that's great. So what about some of those other areas? You start to mention some of the recruitment, some of the other adaptations and changes that you've now been able to make as well. I know, I mean, one really big one for me, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just think we're seeing more of this, but it's important because of what we talked about earlier around, for some people, the label from a personal perspective is important because it empowers them. Right, that label is for them to understand themselves better, and they don't know how else to get there. So by getting the diagnosis, it allows them to unpick some of their life experiences in their journey. Really important. From a child's perspective, I know from personal experience, it's legal, right? In the UK, like I can advocate for my child, but if I actually want that support to be enshrined in law, I actually do need the piece of paper to ensure that I can get an EHCP, an educational health and care plan. But things are changing now. The political sphere is moving, and therefore some of those things will change over time, hopefully for the better. But at the moment, it's almost like you require this label to get the support. So there's something that you've started to do to implement to be able to reduce some of those 4, 5, 6 year waiting lists and empower some of the employees who may be at the sharp end of need, whether that's to understand themselves, to gain support, or to help their family. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so from January 2025, we will enhance the healthcare offering that we give to all employees at Zurich. They have the ability to flex up to different levels, but right from the basic healthcare offering that we give to employees, we've shared with our employees that from next year, they will be able to access neurodiversity assessment, fully funded, up to £4,000 worth of assessment costs over the lifetime for an individual. They'll be able to access a neurodiversity assessment via our private health insurer. It will need a GP referral. We understand that it's difficult also, I'm a human and member of society as well. I get that sometimes it's difficult even to get to see your GP. We also have a benefit that we offer to our people of a remote or virtual GP, lots of different names for it. Virtual GP is the one that we tag it, and that virtual GP assessment, which you can do at various hours of the day, will qualify as your GP referral. So with a relatively simple referral from a GP, we will accept people into our program that allows them and their family members, if they've made them part of their healthcare plan with Zurich, it allows them to access neurodiversity assessments. It's taken us a few years to bring this to fruition. This is, I talked about business cases. This is one of the things where it's been really important for us to understand what the likely cost impact is going to be, because there is one, understand what the cost impacts are likely to be. And then, like any other diversity or inclusivity benefit or change or approach that you bring, like equalising parental leave that we did a few years ago, for me, it's no different to anything else in your business. If it does come with costs, then plan for it. Plan for it like you would plan for anything else. A new marketing campaign, a new system, the opening of a location, doesn't matter what it is, plan for it. We're really proud that from January next year, our people will be able to access this approach to allow them and their family members as appropriate to get the insight, the understanding, the diagnosis that they need. And we did it for a number of reasons. Again, our employees have been asking for it over the last couple of years, but we really do know the impact on people's physical and mental health that can come from understanding yourself somewhat more. If you don't understand what you're dealing with and why you feel the way that you feel, where do you even start to build coping mechanisms to thrive, not just survive? And one of my neurodiverse colleagues shared their story. We encourage people at Zurich to share their stories on all number of different topics, but as part of the work that we've been doing to raise awareness of neurodiversity, one of my neurodiverse colleagues, whose career at Zurich is as a data scientist is just awesome to watch, completely flourishing, is quoted as saying, "When you feel supported and appreciated, it kind of gives you metaphorical wings." For me, that's gold dust, isn't it? Having an individual's personal experience talking about the way that they've been supported in an organization, giving them wings. I just think that individual will work extremely hard for our business. They will probably be incredibly loyal because they feel like there's a good give and get at our organization, and are likely to stay with us and do amazing things for our customers, which is really what it's all about. And then, Theo, alongside that health benefit, should I talk a little bit more about some of the other things that
yes, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
So we were very clear that there is relatively low levels of awareness about neurodiversity in our employee base, same I'm sure as in society. And we've worked with a really fantastic charity called Ambitious About Autism to develop 3 strands of training for people and managers. First, to anybody who just wants to improve their understanding of autism and autism in the workplace. Second, to managers, to help them to improve their understanding of colleagues that they lead, so that you can have better conversations. And then finally, a nice piece of a nice learning intervention to parents and carers to help them explore the autism spectrum. That helped us to really get the conversation about neurodiversity, in society and in the workplace, kind of out in the surface and being talked about. We've done a few other things that I think have been well received as well. We created sensory maps of all our UK workplaces to help neurodivergent employees, and everybody, of course, to find, but the emphasis, it came as a request from our neurodivergent employees, to help them find the best place to work in one of our offices. It might be around temperature or noise or smells or traffic or whatever it may be, but these really cool sensory maps, all created in-house, no need for consultancy and all that kind of stuff, have really helped us to create maps of quieter places in our workplace, or cooler or warmer places. And then finally, we've been a flexible working employer for a long time. Even prior to COVID, we've probably been rolling out flex work at Zurich, the term we use, for the past 10 years. We know that flexibility is just as important to somebody who's neurodivergent, maybe even more so somebody who needs to organize their day differently when they feel like they've maxed out on teams and an interaction, and they might need to split the day in two and spend some downtime in the middle of the day. So we've pushed really hard on the flexibility journey and made sure that flexibility at Zurich is just part of the way that we do things.
Brilliant. And I love the idea of the sensory maps, because the organizations that are building something from scratch, the BBC in Cardiff, for example, can build it with neurodiversity in mind, and they can think about it as part of that build process. But for most organizations, they're not going to be at that point for a long time. They might be in that same building for 20 years. There may be limitations. There may be reasons why they have to have that building. I've worked within the care sector where they do build new buildings, and now they can start to think about it. But some of those old buildings, they need to adapt them over time. So just thinking about a very easy way to make an adaptation like sensory maps, I think, is wonderful. And it's something that you can do together. You can invite people either as part of your ERG or employee resource group, or other informal group that you might have to invite people in. We did it when I was in an organization previously. Just literally walking around and sitting in rooms and going, what are the lights like for people? Inviting people in. We've been into these rooms. We think the lighting might have an issue. That other people want to come along and have a look and feedback to us. And it just, you're right, it really starts to engage that conversation. But actually, you create something really meaningful and tangible that is useful. Because how many times have most of us thought that light is too bright coming through that window, or I can't stand being by the copywriter, or I can't. It's just all these things that can become overwhelming that we just forget about. But then having this opportunity to select where you're going to work from, when you're going to work there, what the environment's going to be like, who you might sit next to, I think it's really fascinating. And so I love that.
You made a really interesting point there as well, Theo, in that sort of discussion around something as simple as sensory maps, and that's involving people. And we operate a number of ERGs, employee resource groups, at Zurich, but our accessibility and inclusion network have been right at the heart of a lot of the work that we've done, creating the sensory maps, prompting me to think about how we do better in recruitment processes. And I've always had this strong sense that, nobody knows your organization better than the people that are already in it. And of course, like many organizations, sometimes we use external views or consult. But from the perspective of the experience of being an employee here, nobody knows your organization, your business, the culture, the things that are encouraged and discouraged around here. Nobody knows it like your own employees. So seeking out groups of people to help us with this kind of work does mean that for something like a sensory map, it doesn't need to cost you anything. It literally can be as simple as making sure that you involve people, you get different levels of experience, you find an interesting map of your floor plate, and then you stick some color coding on it, and that's all you need. You don't need to make this stuff complicated.
Absolutely. And as things develop on, I mean, this is where the use of technology, AI, machine learning, where
Yeah,
you can start to create 3D maps and,
yeah,
you can almost have the virtual experience of going into environments, and it can be colors and lighting, just like some of the new builds where a lot of color, light, texture, smell, taste. Actually, some of the insights that we've learned from dementia, for example,
yeah,
within the care, how texture, smells, taste can really impact in those
yeah.
environments. There's so many things that we can learn from work that's already been done, that has been segmented, that I think bringing some of those learnings in as well can be really useful. And so you've mentioned Ambitious about autism, and I think great that you've partnered with them and called them out, because they've done some fantastic work. And anybody else that you've partnered with, the Buckland report that you utilised, your research that you created, anything else that we should call out in terms of partnerships or work that you've done?
No, probably not specifically in relation to partnerships, but I would genuinely say and share with people. So at Zurich, on the topic of diversity and inclusivity, we really do try to be an open book, because there's no point in one organisation fighting for change when it comes to gender inclusivity, women in leadership, neurodiversity. Doesn't really matter. If we're all pulling in the same direction, then likely we will pull a talent pool along with us. So lots of the information that we've shared on today's discussion is available on our website, in the media pages. We've done some interesting work outside of neurodiversity, actually, but in the area of gender inclusivity, with an organisation called the Behavioural Insights Team. They used to be part of the government's Cabinet Office. Now they're an independent research and psychological nudge organisation. They helped us build the nudge that we implemented a few years ago, where we advertise every job at Zurich as available on a part-time, job share or full-time basis. Those wordings were the psychological nudge. We tipped on its head the default of working. That's been really important to us, and both from the perspective of gender diversity, it's made a huge difference to our organisation, but took us on an even more accelerated, flexible working journey that is just as important to people when it comes to neurodiversity, as it is to most other conditions. And I know that the BIT team, Behavioural Insights team, have also got some very cool research around as well.
Fantastic. And that's just now starting to show the weaving through of those other areas that you've focused on, energy that you've put into, that you can start to see them feeding into the work that you're now doing in neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, and that they work hand in glove or hand in hand, however you want to decide it. And so that's great, right? Because it's like the building blocks, and you're starting to see the positive results. And some of the wins that you can get today, you're already halfway up the stairs through some of that stuff you implemented. Yeah.
And you talked at the start of our conversation, or earlier in our conversation, Theo, about exactly that point about when things, I've just realized, by the way, I'm so expressive. I'm a hands person. Apologies if my hands to our watchers feel like they're coming out the screen.
I love it. Go with it.
You talked about, I'm going to sit on my hands. You talked about interventions that translate across challenges, and things like the language. You specifically referred to this point, the language that organizations use in job adverts. There are all sorts of cool tech that can help you improve this kind of stuff. When we were on our gender diversity journey, and I'm really proud to say we've halved our gender pay gap in 5 years, and we've gone from a situation where we had less than 30% of our senior leaders were women to 48% in the last few years. That's all very cool. One of the things that helped us get there was thinking about the language we used in job adverts. It's just as important when it comes to attracting neurodiverse candidates. There is all sorts of research out there that talks about, sometimes about tone, but also about specific words. When you use the word execute in a job advert, execute a sales strategy, versus using words like build skills and capabilities to deliver your sales targets. The first attracts more men to your organization, the second attracts more women. It's and the same kind of things we talked about or I mentioned earlier about just one term, being a good communicator. The words that we use are so important. We know this stuff, don't we? We know the words that I've used today, the words you and I used when we chatted to before we joined this session, gave me a feeling of kind of safety, and that this would be a great space and that we'd have a great conversation just because of the words that you used. It's no different when we write them down. And you're right, that sort of laser focus on the words one uses in a job advert started with one element of diversity, gender, and has transcended all the way across. There is one other topic, or one other thing that I was going to sort of say, and that is that we do have a number of ERGs at Zurich, our employee resource groups. They're doing incredible work. I spend so much of my time when I'm with them encouraging them to work together, because broadly speaking, the topic might be different, or the specific challenge might be, but we're all trying to achieve the same thing. If you're trying to make your organization more attractive for people with a disability, it's no different to the kind of to the outcome you want to achieve. How you go about it might be different. So when it comes to working with ERGs, I think they're sick of me saying it now. I say, could you do that together? Could Pride and Win actually be doing this piece of work together? Should we join our Cultural Awareness Network and AIM? Couldn't they have a really cool intervention? I think if we think about neurodiversity, impacting people, whether you're male or female or however you identify, regardless of your heritage or your sexuality, there are impacts across the range of people. We're just people, aren't we? ERGs working together, I think, is a real opportunity to make a big difference.
Absolutely. And on that basis of collaboration, many hands make light work, right? And as you're all watching today, I challenge you positively to put your thoughts and ideas in the comments. Share. Steve's been incredible at sharing some of the work they've done, some of the insights, some of the actionable things that you can take back to your workplace. If you've got any companies that you work with, some of you have already started sharing some of them, any reports, anything of interest, gift it in the comment section, because I'm sure Steve would love to hear about it in his team. But also anybody else watching this, this is why a lot of people are turning up today, right? Because they're fascinated about how we get from awareness, from talking about it, to actually tangible stuff that makes a positive difference. And that's where we're starting to get to. It's not always easy, but that is the journey that we're now making. So please, get that stuff in there, or even questions that we can come back and try and answer later on. Now, Steve, thinking about this, what I find a lot of organizations struggle to do is they can implement things, they can even recognize the problem, and they can go, like you mentioned before, gender was a challenge, and it was almost embarrassing that oh no, this is an issue, we now know it, we got to deal with it. Sometimes organizations don't deal with it, they record it and go, and then something doesn't happen. The key to this is, I guess, it's tracking the progress and the data and knowing, okay, well, we did this change in the recruitment thing, we got the feedback, or we looked at it, we looked at the difference it was making. Just give us a little bit of insight to any way that you're going to track some of this, or how you track things currently, or any insight just around the data piece that you could provide others.
Yeah, definitely. So we've spent the last several years joining the data that we have that's people related together. When I talk to colleagues in the insurance industry, or in financial services, or in other industries and organizations, it seems that we all share a common challenge about connecting our people data. You might have 3 or 4 different systems, a recruitment system, an HRS, a payroll system. It seems that we have a common challenge. We have, supported by our group in Switzerland, spent the last few years making sure that we can connect our people data together. From the point that somebody goes onto our website and starts to apply for a role, or applies for a role, to the point that they join us, hopefully, or when they leave us in the future. That connected data is really, really important. I've also found that when you're dealing, whenever you're doing stakeholder management, if you're encouraging your organization to rethink its recruitment approach or whatever it may be, we all know that data is really important. Many very senior people in our organizations are there because they get the power of data. They use it in their decision making. They're razor focused on making sure that their decisions are both have heart and both have head and heart. So connecting the data has been really important to us, and then creating a sound baseline, I guess, based around things like how people are progressing through our organization when if they tell us that they are neurodivergent, how they progress through our organization. It gives you the ability to track. For me, creating a baseline and then deciding on the factors that you're prepared to invest time, energy and effort in tracking, just like you would if you're trying to sell a new product or any of our business data. It would be no different. Make the connections, decide on your baseline, and then start tracking it consistently. The other thing that is really we have found particularly important, Theo, is in the hiring process, creating interesting touch points to ask candidates about their experience, whether they be successful or unsuccessful. And the unsuccessful is, in many senses, just as important, in my opinion, as an HR leader, to the successful, because people who've been successful in your hiring process are most likely to be quite engaged with your organization, and they might feel the need, they don't have to be, but they might feel the need to be kind about your process. People who are unsuccessful are more likely to be really open with you about what it was like to go through that hiring process. So we use Net Promoter System, the people who score 9 and 10, you ignore the 7s and 8s, you take away your detractors. We use that for customer engagement, but we also use it within the talent acquisition space. We ask people how you would score this approach on a scale of 0 to 10. We use NPS to tell us. And then, most importantly, we look at the verbatim comments. So the data tells you one thing, and it's the same for our engagement survey. Like most organizations, we run an engagement survey at Zurich once a year. But wherever we ask people for information about what their experience was like on a scale basis, 1 to 5, 0 to 10, doesn't matter. We also ask them why they feel like they do, or why they gave the answer that they do. There are so many nuggets of wisdom in those verbatim comments. That's where people will tell you, I'm a neurodiverse candidate, you didn't make any adjustments for me, or I'm a neurodiverse candidate and I felt like as soon as I told you I was neurodiverse, you closed down to me. There are so many nuggets of wisdom in that data.
Interesting. And it reminds me of a piece of work within employer branding that was done with Virgin Media, when the head of talent acquisition recognized that they were losing millions and millions of pounds in customers because of the poor candidate experience. And they knew, because they got fed back by the candidate, that was a horrendous experience. I'm a hairdresser, and that was one of the worst experiences. I wanted to make the transition. I prepared really well, and you let me down. And ultimately, they recognized that accounted for a lot more than just that one person. When they knew that, they were able to transform it into an incredible experience from a very challenging experience. And I think here's the sign. I think that these are old examples, but really they play into neurodiversity perfectly well because of the invisible nature of the barrier. So not only is it poor candidate experience, but it's the invisible barriers that are creating that poor experience that we previously didn't understand. And then, so where I'm getting to with this, Steve, is there's not just the impact on those candidates, and that could be many. It's not just the impact on your workforce, that could be many, but actually there's a potential here for you to have a huge impact on your customers. Have you thought about that? Well, as we round this, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an important point, isn't it? One of the first things I did when I kind of had the sort of the privilege to be asked to lead the HR team at Zurich, one of the first things I did was recognize that our HR team were quite disconnected from our customers. We spent the last 5 years talking about what our business does on a day-to-day basis, what products we sell, who our customers are, how we find them, and how we appeal to them. We take the same kind of approach to things like candidate experience and employee experience in its widest sense. Whenever we do something new at Zurich, actually not in the D&I space, but if we launch a new benefit, for example, we launch it like it was a new product so that people understand what we're trying to sell to them, the experience that we're trying to give. We are really clear that there is such a strong connection between your employer brand and the face that you put out to your customers, because, as you say, they are one and the same in many senses. And let's not kid ourselves that people who are looking to join your organization look at the products you sell and how you market them. So candidates look one way and customers look the other way as well. Who are you trying to recruit? What are your social responsibility policies like? Do I think you're a diverse organization? So it's completely interwoven. All I would say to people, or maybe I'd sort of kind of bring towards a couple of core messages as well. First, this is not a problem or a challenge only for HR. The only way you can drive improvements in diversity, and especially around things like neurodiversity, on the basis that I don't hire anybody into Zurich. Actually, I do occasionally to my team, but there are 500, almost 600 hiring managers at Zurich. It's been our job to convince them that giving a great experience and being open to hiring neurodiverse candidates is the right thing to do. The HR team are important, but your business teams, business stakeholders and awareness are really important too. And sort of bringing it back to kind of summarizing the things that we've done, I sort of say, we've reviewed and changed our recruitment processes and actually changed them, not just wrote about them and created slides. We've reviewed and changed it. We've really focused on building an environment and a culture that's safe for people to be who they are. We've encouraged open communication, two-way, between either candidates and hiring managers or employees and their manager when they're here, and their teams as well, so that everybody can adjust what they do so that they can thrive as a team. And then finally, built a health and well-being offering that we think understands the unique challenges neurodiverse colleagues face, but more importantly, that's adapted to their needs.
That's brilliant, and a lovely way to round that all up today, Steve. The comments have been on fire. Lots of people getting involved, thanking for all different aspects of the insights and information you've been giving. Great to hear the work that you're doing. It makes me feel good, because one of the biggest fears I have is that people in the playground who I hear, they are employees. They are leaders, they are managers, they are people. And when you start to influence people within your organization, you are influencing communities. And for me, that is the most important thing that we can do. And the quicker that we can do that, the better it's going to be for every single one of us. So thank you so much for joining me today, Steve. Incredible session. And I very much enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. This has been Neurodiversity with Theo Smith. It's been a real pleasure to have you join us. Please write some stuff in the comments. Let us know what you thought. Give us your advice, guidance, people who you love in the space. Put it in there. Share the love. Great session. And watch out for the next session of Neurodiversity with Theo Smith.